The tray was already in her hands when Hanna Brandt stopped walking. Not because something had frightened her, not because a guard had shouted, or a door had slammed, or any of the 100 things she had learned to stop, for during 4 years of war had announced themselves. She stopped because of what was on the tray. 2 eggs fried, still steaming at the edges. Thick bacon. Bread so soft it had already bent under its own weight. A glass of milk so cold that the condensation had begun to form on the outside, leaving a ring on the metal, quiet and patient and real. The young American soldier who had placed it there was already reaching for the next tray. He had not waited to see her face. She turned to Marta, who stood beside her holding an identical tray with the expression of a woman who has just been handed information she does not know what to do with. "Is this for us?" Hanna whispered. Marta looked at the food. She looked at the soldier. She looked back at the food. And then she said, in a voice stripped of everything except the bare weight of the words, "I don't understand." Neither did Hanna. Not yet, but she would. And by the time she did, everything she had prepared herself to believe, not just about this place, but about who she was inside it, would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. Stay with this story. What happens next is the part nobody talks about in the history books, and it will change how you see everything that came before it. She had been trying to understand America since the ship, not the country itself. That was too large. And large things she had learned to distrust, because large things were where the lies lived, in the speeches and the newsreels and the communiques that always described a different war than the one happening outside the window. What she had been trying to understand was the specific texture of this place, the way it felt different from everything she had been prepared for, and why that difference unsettled her more than the expected cruelties would have. Hanna Brandt was 24 years old. She had spent the last 3 years as a signals auxiliary, a communications operator. Technically, though by the final year the word technically had come to mean very little, because the communications had largely stopped communicating anything useful, and the operators had largely been reassigned to whatever was needed most urgently in whatever remained of the unit structure. She had been captured in April, in the last weeks, in a town that had already changed hands twice in 4 days. Her papers were incomplete. Her unit was dissolved. She was, in the formal language of the document the American officer had written during intake, a female auxiliary personnel of undetermined attachment. She had found that phrase, for some reason, more clarifying than anything she had been called in years. After all the designations and hierarchies and categories of wartime, to be reduced to undetermined attachment felt almost like honesty. The ship had taken 11 days. 31 women in a converted cargo hold, which smelled of rust and particular despair of people moving toward a destination they cannot name. Some of them had not known they were going to America. Marta felt hadn't believed it, said it was impossible, said the Americans had no reason to ship prisoners across the Atlantic when there were camps enough in France and England. But Hanna had known from the food, even the hold, the rations had been real, actual bread, tinned meat, coffee that smelled like something from before the war. You could tell a great deal about where you were going by what the people taking you there thought was worth giving you. Marta Fell was 38 and had run a manufacturing floor in Nuremberg for 6 years before and during the war, managing shift schedules, supply chains, inventory systems, and the particular human problem of keeping production moving when half your workforce had been conscripted and the other half was exhausted. She was a person built for precision, and she applied precision to everything, including her opinions, which were exact and rarely wrong. She had been wrong once, in a way that mattered, and it had made her more careful about everything that came after. She did not talk about what she had been wrong about. Hanna understood it anyway, the way you understand things in a barracks when there is no privacy and silence speaks its own language. Elsa Richter was 19. She had the kind of face that shows everything before the person wearing has decided to show anything. Thoughts crossing it in sequence, unedited, like weather. She had been a radio assistant, barely 6 months in, when the front collapsed around her unit. She did not speak much on the ship. She looked out windows, or the approximate locations of windows in a hold that had none, with the steady outward gaze of someone trying to see past the walls of where they are. The 3 of them were assigned the same barracks on arrival, which is how Hanna came to know them in the specific way you know people when the knowing happens in close quarters with no distractions. You learn the rhythms of how a person sits still. You learn what they do with their hands when they are afraid. You learn what they reach for in the morning before they are fully themselves again. The camp sat in a wide, flat valley in the interior of a state she still could not quite locate on the map she was constructing in her mind. Dry hills ringed it. Pine trees lined the western fence. The sky above it was a kind of sky that exists only in places that have never had air raids. Unbroken, indifferent, enormous. She stood in the intake line and looked at the compound and thought, this was built to function. That was the first unsettling thing. Not the fences or the watchtowers, which she had expected, but the organization, the clean walkways, the vegetable gardens along the south fence, clearly being maintained by someone who cared whether things came up. The way the American soldiers moved through the morning routines with the calm efficiency of people who had been doing this for months and expected to keep doing it, without urgency, without theater, without the particular violence of men who need to demonstrate their power at every available moment. She had prepared for demonstration. She had prepared for performance of dominance. She had not prepared for routine. Name, age, occupation, medical status, barracks assignment. The officer behind the table wrote her answers without reaction, as though the act of processing a captured enemy woman was exactly as unremarkable as any other administrative task, which perhaps it was. The whole thing took 4 minutes. She was handed a blanket, directed north, and that was the end of it. No one had shouted. No one had made her feel small. No one had done anything at all except write down her name. She walked to the barracks with a blanket folded over one arm and the uncomfortable sensation of a person who's been carrying a weight for a long time and has just been told to set it down, but cannot find a place to put it. The barracks were narrow and plain. Metal beds, thin mattresses, one wool blanket each. The floors had been swept recently. The windows were real windows, not slits, and they faced east. Near the door, someone had left a partial bar of soap on the shelf. White plain, dry at the edges, no scent, nothing luxurious about it, just real. She stared at that soap for longer than it deserved. Then she made her bed and sat on the edge of it and looked at the wall. Marta walked the length of the room, once without stopping, cataloging. Then she sat across from Hanna and folded her hands in her lap. "It's clean," she said, in a tone that made clear this was not a comfort. "I know," Hanna said. "I want to know why it's clean." Elsa, sitting on the bed nearest the door, looked at both of them. "Maybe it's just clean," she said. Marta said nothing. But Hanna could see the calculation running behind her eyes, the same one she suspected was running behind her own. The patient, methodical turning over of every detail, looking for the mechanism, the hidden logic, the thing that would explain why this place felt so different from every story they had been told about what this place would be. They did not find the answer that evening. The meal was simple: vegetable soup, bread, a small tin of fruit, and it was adequate in every respect. Nothing more needed. They ate. The hall noise was ordinary noise. American soldiers and prisoners ate under the same roof in different sections, and the sound it was indistinguishable from the sound of ordinary people feeding themselves, which was, in its own quiet way, the strangest thing she had experienced since the ship. She lay awake that night, mapping the camp sounds in the dark. Generator, guard rotation, the wind off the valley, moving through the pine trees in long, slow waves. She had been doing this. The cataloging of sounds, the construction of a mental map of whatever space she occupied, since the second winter of the war, when the difference between knowing and not knowing what was outside your door had become the difference between manageable fear and the other kind. She could not switch it off. She was not sure, lying in the narrow dark of the barracks, whether she wanted to. Across the room, Elsa was already asleep. The sound of her breathing was slow and even, the breathing of someone young enough to still trust unconsciousness. Marta was awake. Hanna could tell by the quality of her stillness. Neither of them said anything. They lay in the dark of an American prisoner of war camp and listened to the wind in the pine trees and waited for morning, which came the way mornings always come, without asking permission, without announcement, without caring in the least what you had prepared yourself for. The breakfast was on the second morning. The bell rang at 6:15. Hanna dressed in the dim light, boots first as always, the habit of 4 years. She went to the mess hall ahead of the others because she wanted to see it before it became noise. She wanted to understand the system before the crowd arrived, the way you want to read the room before the meeting starts, the way people who have learned that information is survival always want to arrive first. She was not prepared for what she saw. She got 3 steps inside the door before her legs stopped. The tray was placed in front of her. The eggs, the bacon, the bread, the milk. The young soldier already reaching for the next tray, not watching her, not waiting for her reaction, not performing generosity, just serving breakfast. The way a person serves breakfast when breakfast is simply the thing that happens in the morning, and it has never occurred to them not to. Marta arrived and stood beside her. They both looked at their trays for a long moment. "This is a trick," Marta said. Her voice was flat and certain. "They show us this the first day, and then it disappears. The removal is meant to hurt more than the shortage would have." It was a reasonable analysis. It was exactly the kind of reasoning a careful and experienced person would produce. Hanna almost agreed with it. Then she watched the young soldier serve the third woman behind her with the same unhurried motion, the same casual adequacy, and she thought, "He doesn't look like someone running a trick. He looks like someone serving breakfast at 6:15 in the morning who would rather be asleep." "Maybe," she said. They sat. Elsa arrived with her tray and looked at the food the way a person looks at something they want to trust, but haven't been given permission to yet. She picked up the bread first, held it for a moment, set it down, picked up again, and took a small bite. Her face went through several things quickly. The caution, the surprise, then something she couldn't quite put away in time. And then she kept eating. She did not try to explain what she was feeling. She just ate. Hanna lifted her fork. She ate slowly. Around the hall, she could see the same progression at every table. The initial stillness, the suspended disbelief, the testing, then the quiet that followed, which was a different quality of quiet than anything she had heard in the camp so far. Not the quiet of suppression, not the quiet of fear or emptiness. The quiet of people who have just been handed information that doesn't fit the category they put in and are sitting with the discomfort of reclassification. At the table nearest a window, a woman named Greta set down her spoon and stared at the food on her plate with the expression of someone who's been caught doing something they were told was impossible. She picked the spoon back up. She set it down again. The bacon was real. The bread was soft and warm. The milk was cold in a way that means someone has kept it properly, which is a small thing, and also not a small thing, because keeping things properly requires a sustained belief that they are worth keeping. "Why?" Marta said. She had eaten most of her plate and set her fork down with the careful finality of someone who is not committed to the thing they're doing. Strategically, what do they get from this? Hanna looked at the young soldier behind the counter. He was pouring coffee now, tilting the pot with one hand, looking out the window while he did it, thinking about something else entirely. "I don't think there's a strategy," she said slowly. Marta looked at her sharply. "Everything has a strategy. Not this." Hanna watched the soldier for another moment. "I think this is just what they do. I think they feed people breakfast because it's morning and breakfast is what you do in the morning." Marta was quiet for a long time. Then she said, and this was the thing Hanna would think about later, the sentence she would return to many times in the weeks that followed. "Then they are more dangerous than I thought." Not dangerous in the military sense. Dangerous in the specific sense of people whose habits are stronger than their circumstances. You could calculate against deliberate cruelty. You could build a wall against it. Keep it at the necessary distance. Survive it by refusing to let it define you. You could not build the same kind of wall against someone who simply gave you breakfast because it was morning. Elsa looked up from her plate. She had been listening without appearing to listen, which Hanna had noticed she did often. "I think," she said carefully, "that it might just be true, that they're just—" She paused, finding the word. "Normal. That they're normal people who do normal things." Marta turned to look at her, not unkindly, but with the full weight of 5 years behind her eyes. "You have been in this war for 6 months, she said. "Don't say that like it's simple." The table went quiet. Elsa looked at her plate. Something crossed her face that wasn't quite hurt and wasn't quite agreement, but was the expression of someone absorbing a thing they cannot argue with and choosing to speak anyway. She looked up. "I know it isn't simple," she said. "I'm saying it anyway." "We were told they weren't," Marta said. "Yes," Elsa said. "We were told a lot of things." No one argued. The hall noise continued around them, and the steam rose from the coffee cups. And outside the window, the pale morning sky stretched over the valley without acknowledgement of any of it. And Hanna sat in the middle of all that and felt, for the first time since the ship, the specific sensation of a weight not lifted but rebalanced. Shifted slightly on the axis, the center of gravity moved just enough to change the way everything else was distributed. Something had changed, not in the camp, in her. She would spend the next 3 days trying to understand exactly what it was, and why it had happened, and what it meant. She would find the answer in the last place she expected. Pause for a second. I want to know, at what point in this story did something shift for you? Drop the timestamp in the comments. You'll be surprised how many people stopped at the exact same moment. The laundry detail was called on the third morning. 20 names. Hannah's among them, and Marta's. They were marched across the compound under a wide, pale sky, past the vehicle pool, past the infirmary with its red cross on the canvas roof, past the garden along the south fence, where someone was on their knees in the early light, pulling weeds from a row of beans with the methodical concentration of a person who has decided, in the middle of a war, that the beans still matter. The laundry building sat at the far edge of the compound. From outside it looked unremarkable, wood and sheet metal, steam venting from the roof vents. The sounds were then unidentifiable until the door opened. Then Hanna stopped again. For the second time in 3 days, her legs made their own decision. The building was enormous. Industrial washing machines lined one entire wall, each one the size of a small vehicle, running with a steady mechanical thunder that moved through the floor and up through the soles of her boots. Long steel-topped tables ran the length of the room, and on them lay uniforms, sheets, blankets, and garments of every kind, sorted, she realized after a moment, with a specificity that went well beyond the functional. Not just separated by fabric type and color, though they were that. Separated by processing category. Washing only, washing plus repair, hospital priority, general camp circulation. Each pile tagged, each tag numbered. Each number cross-referenced in the ledgers that 2 American civilian women were working through at a desk near the door with the focused speed of people who have done this long enough that their hands know it separately from their eyes. Steam rose from everything. The room was hot and loud and organized with precision that felt, in its way, more disciplined than anything Hanna had encountered inside a military structure in the last 2 years of the war, which, she thought, said something specific and pointed about what had happened to military structures in the last 2 years of the war. She went to her assigned station at the sorting tables and began to work. The job was not complicated, but was exact. Each incoming item matched to its tag to its ledger number to the correct processing pile. She had to learn the system quickly, and she did, because she was good at systems, had always been good at them, had spent 3 years in communications work that was fundamentally about systems, about the architecture, how information moves from one place to another without being lost. Nothing gets lost. She understood this about the room within the first 20 minutes. It was a principle around which everything else was organized. An item came in. It was tagged. The tag was logged. The log was cross-referenced. The cross-reference was checked. And at every stage, something was added, a note, an assessment, a repair instruction, a priority marker that ensured the item arrived at its destination in a condition that had been thought about in advance. She picked up a jacket from the nearest pile. The tag listed the owner's name, the date received, the damage type, the return requirement. 2 missing buttons to be replaced before return. Not returned in any condition. Returned in the specific condition required. She turned it over. On the collar, a small handwritten note in careful script. An addition from someone who had checked the jacket after the initial tag and noticed something else, a fraying at the cuff, and had added it to the repair instruction rather than letting it pass. She stood holding the jacket for a moment longer than the work required. 2 tables down, Marta was working through a pile of sheets from the camp hospital. Hanna saw her pick up one sheet, examine its tag, set it in a separate pile, and then stop. She looked at the tag again. She set the sheet down. She picked up the next one, read its tag, looked back at the first pile. Something about what she was reading had made her pause. Hanna moved to her side. "What is it?" Marta handed her one of the sheets. The tag indicated it had already completed one full wash cycle and was being sent through a second before return to the hospital ward. The sheet was not visibly soiled. There was no obvious necessity for the second cycle. The hospital had simply requested it. Hanna read the tag twice. She set the sheet in the correct pile. They worked in silence for another hour. The machines thundered. Steam moved through the room in slow waves. The American workers moved with the rhythm of long practice. Each person exactly where they were needed, no motion wasted, nothing performed. The young sergeant called his numbers at intervals. Two older men at the pressing machines at the far end worked with the concentrated ease of people for whom this had become muscle memory. Near the end of the afternoon, a truck arrived with a new load from an outside work detail. The clothes caked with a particular density of summer agricultural work, dust and sweat and plant matter. So deeply worked into the fabric, it had almost become part of it. Among the bundles, Hanna saw something that stopped her the way things stop you when you've been waiting to be stopped without knowing it. Several of the items were tagged with German names, prisoner names. Their names. The Americans had mixed the prisoner work details laundry into the same load as the regular camp laundry. The same truck, the same system, the same tags, the same logs, the same repair assessments, the same second wash cycle if required. One of the other women stepped forward immediately. Those are ours. The sergeant checked the tags. They go through the same process. She waited. All of them. All of them. No pause in the answer. No special category for prisoner clothing. No pile set aside for later. The same system, applied uniformly, because a system applied non-uniformly was not a system. The woman looked at Hanna. Hanna looked back. In the last hour of the shift, sorting a hospital bundle, Hanna found a handkerchief tucked inside a folded uniform. Civilian, old, embroidered in one corner with a name and a small pattern, the kind of thing made at home by someone who had time and chose to spend it making something careful for someone they loved. Missed during the initial intake. She stared at it. An American guard nearby noticed. She waited for it to be taken. Counted as contraband, handled with the brisk indifference of people who have more important things to track than a stranger's sentiment. Instead, the guard picked it up gently, read the embroidered name, found the corresponding tag uniform, and pinned the handkerchief to it with a safety pin. So it would travel with the clothes it belonged to, so it would be returned. Nothing gets lost. Marta appeared at her shoulder. She had seen it too. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the handkerchief pinned to the tag, and then she said something so quiet Hanna almost missed it beneath the machine noise. Back home, near the end, they were reusing the same bandages, washing them and reusing them. We were told it was being managed. She paused. The hospital here asked for a second wash cycle on a sheet that looked clean, not because it was necessary, because someone decided that a patient healing in that bed deserved a sheet that had been washed twice. She turned to look at the rows of machines, the ledgers, the workers moving through their practice rhythms, the system humming along in the steam and the heat with its quiet refusal to let small things be discarded. They never stopped taking care of the small things, she said. That's not an accident. That's how you win. She went back to her station. She kept working. Hanna stood at the sorting table with the handkerchief in her mind and felt the ground shift slightly under the architecture of everything she had assumed. Not dramatically, not with the force of revelation, just the quiet, structural sensation of a load-bearing wall being revealed to be in a different place than the blueprint had indicated. She kept sorting. She matched and tagged and logged. And somewhere in the middle of the fourth hour, the analysis stopped. Not because she had run out of things to analyze, because the distance that analysis requires, that small gap between the thing and the person looking at it, had closed without her noticing. She was not observing the room anymore. She was just in it. The machines were loud. Her hands knew what to do. She let them. She had not expected to feel at home in a laundry room. She did not call it that. But something in her had unclenched, and she did not reach for the word because words were how she kept the distance. And for the first time since April, she did not want the distance. Don't skip ahead. The moment everyone remembers from this story, the one that stays with you for days, hasn't happened yet. It's coming. Stay. On the fourth day, The coffee became a problem, not her coffee. The coffee of the men 3 tables over. A group from the later transport. Newer arrivals still wearing their old identities like armor. They hadn't found a reason yet to take off. She had seen this before. The performance of unimpressibility. The loud consensus that nothing here was good enough to be worth noticing. They called the coffee machine oil. They called it boot water. They pushed the cups away and laughed and made certain everyone in the hall could see them laughing, because that was the point. The being seen, the refusal to be seen as moved by anything, the very loudness of the joke announcing how much they needed it. She watched them the way you watch a fire that's burning something that was already dead. The cook was a civilian named Frank. She had gathered from 3 days of watching the kitchen operation. He was in his 50s, thick through the shoulders, with a bad leg that made his walk slightly uneven but never slower. He measured the coffee. She had seen him do it every morning. The careful leveling of the scoop, the attention to the water temperature, the small adjustments made with the quiet conviction of someone who believed the end product was worth getting right. He ran his kitchen the way the laundry building ran its operations, with a consistent application of care to things that a less organized mind would have classified as not worth caring about. On the 4th morning, he came out from behind the counter. She had never seen him do that. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked toward the mocker's table with the unhurried step of a man who has made up his mind and is giving no one the gift of urgency. The room shifted as rooms shift when someone with weight to them starts moving through it. The laughter faded before he reached the table. He stopped beside the loudest man. He looked at the untouched cups. He said something in English and waited for the interpreter. What he said was this: his wife wrote him letters from home. She always asked the same question. Not whether he was cold, not whether the work was hard, whether the boys still got hot coffee. His son was in France, had been for nearly 2 years. When the boy was 16, he used to sneak into the kitchen before dawn and pour himself a cup too strong for him, nowhere close to enjoying it, and drink it every morning before anyone was awake. Not because it tasted good, because it tasted like being home. He let that sit. Some things, he said, aren't just flavor. He made his offer. Tomorrow morning, fresh, properly made, 1 full cup before the jokes. The loudest man said yes. She saw what it cost him. Not much, but something real. That night in the barracks, Elsa asked Hanna what she thought would happen in the morning. Hanna thought about it for longer than the question seemed to require. I think he'll make it good, she said. And I think they'll drink it. And I think something will change, and none of them will say that it changed. Elsa nodded. She had known that already. She had asked because she wanted to hear Hanna say it. The next morning, the smell reached her outside the building. Same beans, but something different in the preparation. The same notes played with more care, the way the same words mean different things depending on whether the person saying them believed them. The hall registered it before the doors were fully open. Conversations faded on their own. She found a seat near the window where she could see the men's table. Frank carried the pot himself. He poured without theater. The loudest man lifted his cup and made a small performance of it. A toast, a few words in German that got nervous laughter. Then he drank. His face changed. Not loudly. The smirk left first. Then his expression settled into something she recognized. The look of a person encountering a truth they are not ready for, encountering it anyway, finding it already inside them before they have decided whether to let it in. He swallowed. He looked at the cup. He took a second sip, this time without the performance. Around him, the table reached for their cups. One by one, Hanna drank her own slowly. The bitterness opened into something beneath it. Warmth, depth, a trace of sweetness that wasn't sweetness exactly, but the quality of things that had been made with the intention that they should be good. She sat with it. She thought about her mother's kitchen in Munich. A specific Tuesday in October, 1938. The window that faced the courtyard, always slightly fogged by the kettle. Her mother's slippers on the tile. The smell of real coffee moving through the apartment, while the city outside still believed in ordinary Tuesdays. She had not thought of that morning in a very long time. She had been careful not to. She set down the cup. At the next table, Elsa was looking at her. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Later, walking back to the barracks, Elsa fell into step beside her. After a while, she said, Do you think they know what they're doing to us? With the food, the laundry, all of it? Hanna considered the question carefully. It was the right question. It was the question she had been circling since the morning with the tray. No, she said. I think they're just doing what they do. I think that's the whole point. She paused. The cruelty we were prepared for would have been easier. You can push against cruelty. You can name it and refuse to be broken by it, and keep yourself separate from it. She stopped walking. You can't push against someone who is just serving breakfast because it's morning. Elsa looked at her. Then what do? Hanna started walking again. I don't know yet, she said. I'm still finding out. They returned to the barracks at 3 p.m. to find it had been searched. Not ransacked. Nothing theatrical. A routine security sweep. She knew this because the processing sergeant had mentioned it weeks earlier that all prisoner quarters were subject to periodic inspection. She had filed the information and thought nothing more about it. She had not considered what it would feel like to come back to the evidence. Elsa's small novel, the one she had carried since before capture, positioned each morning on the windowsill facing east so the spine wouldn't fade, had been moved to the floor beside the bed. Marta's letter, the one she had been writing the night before, folded with the careful deliberateness of a private thing, was still there but refolded, slightly off-center, touched by someone who had not known or simply had not thought that the way a letter is folded can mean something. Hanna's soap, which she had placed back on its shelf each morning, as a small private assertion that she still occupied the space in a way that was hers, was on the floor near the door. Nothing was taken. Nothing was broken. The soldiers had done their job without cruelty and without malice, and without any awareness that these small arrangements were the only geography left of the women who had made them. That was the point. They stood in the barracks doorway. Elsa picked up her book from the floor and held it without opening it. Marta looked at her refolded letter for a long moment and did not touch it. Outside, the camp continued its afternoon routines without interruption. Voices, a truck reversing, the distant generator, all of it unchanged and indifferent, because everything outside this door the inspection had meant nothing at all. They were still prisoners. The fences were still there. Whatever the last 4 days had offered had not altered the fundamental geometry of the place or their position inside it. Elsa set the book back on the windowsill, facing east, spine against the sill exactly as before. She sat on the edge of her bed. She did not hum. Marta picked up the letter. She held it for a moment. Then she set it on the table and smoothed it flat with one hand, slowly, pressing out the wrong fold, restoring the shape of the thing to what she had intended. Hanna sat on her bunk in the silence of the room and understood something she had not quite understood before. That kindness and power were not the same thing, and that the presence of one did not cancel the other. The cook had made the coffee right. The guard had pinned the handkerchief to the tag. The hospital had asked for a second wash cycle. All of that was true, and the soldiers had walked through this room this afternoon and moved everything without thinking about it, because they were doing their job, and these were enemy prisoners, and that was true too. Both things at once. She would have to learn to hold both. She had not thought she needed to learn that. She understood now that she did. Before we get to what happened next, I need to ask you something. If you had been sitting in that room on that afternoon, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Lieutenant Morris came the following morning. She arrived quietly, the way competent people arrive at things, without announcement, without theater, with supply list and 2 nurses and a translator and the specific focused attention of someone who has already decided what she is doing and does not require the situation confirm it. She explained to the translator that she was conducting a medical assessment of the new female prisoners. Standard procedure. Nothing alarming. Most of the women submitted without difficulty. Hanna submitted with the same careful compliance she had brought to everything in the camp. Present cooperative, revealing only what was required. It was Elsa's assessment that changed the afternoon. Morris was checking for lice, a standard part of intake she had been completing efficiently down the line, when she parted Elsa's hair and stopped. She did not speak immediately. She looked, with particular quality of attention that medical people develop, not clinical detachment, but its opposite, the heightened presence of someone for whom looking at a person carefully has become a form of respect. Elsa sat perfectly still. Then Morris spoke quietly to the translator. The translator turned to Elsa. She wants to know when you last washed your hair. With real water and soap. Elsa looked at the floor for a moment. I don't remember. Morris looked at the other women around the barracks. At Marta. At Hanna. At all 14 faces. And what she saw in them. Hanna understood this later. Turning it over was not just dirt and neglect. It was something a supply list would not capture, and a medical assessment form had no box for the specific expression of people who have spent so long in circumstances that refuse them ordinary dignity that they have stopped registering ordinary dignity as something they are permitted to want. She said something to the other nurses. One left immediately. The other began writing on a requisition form. What is she doing? Marta asked. Hanna translated the interpreter's explanation. Morris was requesting wash basins, hot water, soap towels, combs. She was converting the storage room at the end of the block into a temporary washing station. She was going to wash their hair. Marta stared. Why? The translator relayed the question. Morris answered without looking up from her supply list. The translator gave him the 4 words she had said. Because it is time. The storage room was cleared in under an hour. 3 wash basins on wooden stools. White sheets hung on lines to create privacy partitions. A camp stove with a kettle running continuously. Rough towels. Plain soap. For combs. It was not luxurious. It was not meant to be. It was clean and warm and arranged with seriousness that said, this matters. The fact that it is happening matters. The person it is happening to matters. The attention itself was a statement. The women stood in the doorway and looked at it. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then the youngest of them, a girl perhaps 16 or 17 who had come in with a later group, whose name Hanna still did not know, took a step back and said something in a low voice. Hanna caught it. The girl was saying that it didn't help. That clean hair didn't make a person clean again. That putting on something fresh while still feeling ruined underneath was not cleaning yourself but lying to yourself, and she had had enough of lies. Several others were quiet in a way that agreed. Morris was watching from the doorway. She could not have understood all the words. She understood the stillness. She set down the supply list. She walked to the nearest basin. She rolled up her sleeves. She picked up the pitcher, turned to the girl with the clipped brown hair, Lena, barely 18, and placed a towel over her shoulders. Lena flinched the way a person flinches when they have been touched unexpectedly by something gentle, because gentle has become a surprise and not the other way around. No one here will mock you, Morris said in her careful German. You do not have to be afraid. Lena sat. Morris poured the warm water slowly. Dark streams ran into the basin. Not just dirt. Weeks and months of everything. The road and the smoke and the winter that had gone on past the point where winters are supposed to end, and the specific residue of being moved through a collapsing world without ever being allowed to stop. It ran off Lena's hair and into the basin, and Morris worked the soap through the matted sections with the unhurried patience of someone who has decided at the beginning of this afternoon that she is going to finish what she started properly. Lena sat rigid for 30 seconds. Her hands were fists in her lap, knuckles white. Then Morris reached a section near the crown that had been matted for what looked like months, and she began working through it with the same slow care, not pulling, not forcing, finding the way through, and something released in Lena's shoulders. Then her whole frame began to shake. She was crying, not the loud crying of panic or grief. The silent kind, the kind that slips out before a person can stop it, tears moving straight down her face while an American military nurse untangled months of war from her hair. No one spoke. No one moved for a long moment. The room held the silence the way a room holds something precious. Then the tall blonde woman who had been glaring at everyone since the morning of arrival sat down without a word at the second basin and cried before the water even touched her head. The red-haired girl asked in a whisper whether they could keep the combs. The girl who had said there was no point crossed the room slowly and sat on the third stool and kept apologizing for how filthy her hair was until one of the other nurses took her hand and said, simply, "Stop. We've seen worse. Sit still." For the next 3 hours, the storage room was something no camp procedure document had a category for. Not a medical facility. Not a processing station. Not any official designation at all. It was something older and more necessary, a room where women who had come to the end of the world stood over steaming basins and were given back, piece by piece, in the most ordinary way imaginable, something they had not known they were still capable of receiving. If that moment hit you, and I think it did, then you already know this channel is different. Subscribe, not for the algorithm, because these women deserve to be remembered, and someone has to keep telling their stories. Hanna waited until the end. She was not sure, for most of those 3 hours, whether she was going to go at all. She watched the others. She watched Marta go. Marta, who sat on the stool with the flat expression of a woman treating this as a practical necessity, and came back 15 minutes later with her hair damp and clean, and sat on her bunk and looked at her hands for a very long time without saying anything to anyone. She watched Elsa go and come back with her face changed in a way that was not happiness and was not relief, but was something between those two things that had its own specific weight. Then she went. The basin was warm. Morris had kept the kettle going all 3 hours, maintaining the temperature with the quiet persistence of someone who decided at the start of this afternoon that no one was going to sit down at a cold basin. Hanna sat. The towel went over her shoulders. The pitcher tipped. The water hit her scalp and moved through her hair and ran into basin, and what came off was everything. Every road, every cold floor she had slept on, every morning she had looked in the direction of a future she was no longer sure existed, and kept moving anyway, because stopping was not a choice that was available to her. It ran into the basin in dark streams and was carried away. Morris worked through the soap with steady hands. No rush, no performance, just the work itself, done the way work should be done when the person it is for matters. Hanna looked at the water in the basin. She said nothing for a long time. Then, I was wrong about a lot of things. Morris kept working. Most people are, she said, about most things. That was all. No reassurance. No argument. No absolution. Just a plain acknowledgement of a plain fact, delivered by someone whose hands were in her hair, given by a woman to another woman over a basin of dark water in a storage room in 1945. And it was exactly enough. The water was rinsed clear. Morris wrapped Hanna's hair in a towel. She handed her a comb. Hanna took it. She held it. She did not use it yet. She just held it in both hands and felt the weight of it, which was nothing. A few grams of plain material, completely unremarkable, the kind of object you would walk past 1,000 times in an ordinary life without noticing. She felt the weight of it anyway. The clean clothes were accepted that evening. Not all at once, not eagerly, but willingly, one by one. The women took the folded items from the tables and went behind the sheet partitions and came back wearing them. They looked like people who had not yet learned to inhabit peacetime. But the shells were cracked, light coming through at the seams. Elsa sat on the edge of her bunk in the lamplight, combing her clean hair, slowly, top to end, the repetition of self-care that is also the practice of believing yourself worth caring for. She was humming something quiet and private. Hanna didn't recognize it. She thought it might be something from before the war, from the version of Elsa that had existed before the war had decided what Elsa was for. Marta sat at the small table near the door, writing a letter. Hanna had not seen her write anything since the ship. She did not ask who the letter was to. Outside, the camp sounds continued. Generator, guard rotation, wind in the pines. The same wind as every night, indifferent and enormous, and moving through the trees with the ease of something that has never had to ask for permission to go anywhere. The same fences, the same wire, the same uncertainty of what came next, what the processing would eventually decide, what was left at home, which names on the list of the missing would be found, and which were permanently gone. None of that had been answered. None of it had been resolved. But something had changed, not in the camp, in her, in the precise interior architecture of who she was, and what she believed was true about the world and the people in it. The change was not comfortable. It was not the warm, clean feeling of having been right about something. It was a specifically uncomfortable feeling of having been wrong about something large, and of having been shown that you were wrong not by an argument, not by someone explaining to you at length why your assumptions were incorrect, but by a tray of eggs, a handkerchief pinned to a tag, a cup of coffee made properly, warm water poured slowly over matted hair. You could not argue with warm water. There was nothing to argue against. There was only the water and the decision it carried, and the person behind the decision who had decided at 6:15 in the morning or at whatever hour they had made the choice that whoever was sitting at that table or in that basin or at that sorting station deserved the same thing that every other person deserved, to be treated as though they were real and specific and worth the care required to do the thing right. She looked at the comb in her hand. She had been holding it since the storage room. She had not used it yet. She was not sure why. Perhaps because using it meant something was over, the part where she was too broken to be ordinary, and she was not quite ready to be done with that part, because being done with it required accepting that it was possible to be ordinary again. That ordinary was still a country she had access to, that the distance between where she had been, and where ordinary things like combs and clean hair and soft bread in the morning existed, was a distance that could be crossed. She put the comb to her hair. The first stroke went clean through. Clean hair, warm from the towel. Her own hair, hers. The hair of a person who existed and had a name and was sitting on a bunk in a wooden building in America on a May evening in 1945 with a lamp burning and the wind in the pines, and somewhere in the next room the sound of Elsa humming something from Before the World Had Gone Wrong. She kept combing, slowly, top to end, top to end. Outside, the valley held its enormous silence. The pines stood still against the darkening sky. Through the east-facing window, the first stars had appeared, small and precise, indifferent and permanent. The same stars that were visible above Munich and above France, and above every city and camp and road and field where the living in the dead of this war were right now becoming themselves again or ceasing to be. She had been wrong about a lot of things. Most people were. About most things. She kept the comb moving through her clean hair and felt, underneath the discomfort of her vision, underneath the long weight of everything that brought her here, something small and very old and almost impossible. The first thin thread of what it felt like to be alive in ordinary time. I'll leave you with one question, not about the war, about the moment. What do you think she felt, not in that room, but years later, when she was old and quiet and the war was long over, and she remembered that one ordinary morning, right below, one sentence. I want to read what you think.